Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be something special, interesting, meaningful, something that's pertinent to the work that you do. We've got some really interesting thinking, and of course it's a great pleasure to welcome Sir Martin Sorrell, who is the Executive Chairman of S4 Capital and one of the great advertising leaders in the world. And Sir Martin, welcome, great to see you here at MadFest. And of course also Will Page, very notable as a rockonomist and economist. And so to start off the session today, we'd like to introduce you to Will. Will is going to show you a few things around which we're going to be addressing this particular session, all about glocalization, not globalization, but glocalization. So first off the mark, let's introduce you to Will Page. Will, go for it.
Thank you. Quick backstory. 5th of February this year, the paperback of my book was published, and I was invited to join the BBC One show and sit on the sofa and tell a nice, happy, feel-good story that isn't it great that the top 10 songs last year in Britain were all British acts. For the first time in 60 years, we got a clean sweep of British talent topping the charts. I'm going to watch a very quick clip of this to show how I made a complete car crash of that interview.
Doing so well in Britain. I think it's the way that we are discovering music. If you look at how the streaming services are working with an algorithm that everybody is being curated for with their own unique tastes. So 20 million people listen to your radio show, they all listen to the same song. There's 20 million people on Spotify in the UK, and they're all listening to 20 million unique playlists. I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen this local dominance of local charts. Same thing in Germany, the top 10 in Germany were all German, and the same thing in Italy too. The top 10 in Italy were all Italian.
Exactly. And the same thing in France. The top songs in France were all French. As I sit on stage today, in July 2023, the top 40 songs in Italy are all Italian bands performing in Italian. Nobody's listening to English language content in Europe anymore. What does all this mean? Well, I wrote this article in the Financial Times. It's the most read piece in the FT Weekend, and I'd like to do a quick cash prize here. If anyone can prove me wrong on this claim, I will give you the best bottle of sherry cask Speyside whiskey Scotland has ever produced. Britain has always been a proud creative exporter of goods. We've always produced pop stars, an Adele, a Coldplay. We knocked them out every year. I haven't seen a global pop star come from this country since Dua Lipa in 2017. And if I check my watch, that was a long time ago. This is what glocalization means, Ralph. So, let's go down a rabbit hole with 5 observations, and I'm going to hand back over to Ralph, who can interview somebody who knows more about this than anyone in this room. What does this thing that's happened in music was the first to suffer, the first to recover from disruption, mean for your world of advertising? Let's think quickly about games, books and films, regulation, societal trends, national identities, which is where it gets really interesting, a citizen approach, and then finally, MadFest. 1 minute on each, and then back to Ralph. On gaming, for those who know the Sony PlayStation, you don't need an introduction to Chris Deering, the president of Sony at the time. He told me that in the early noughties, when they introduced SingStar or Karaoke Challenge, Swedish customers had the choice of singing the global hits in English or buying the game which is for the lesser hits in Swedish, and they always picked local language content. That was 20 years ago. They had choice, music didn't offer you choice. They were interactive, music wasn't interactive, it was a CD, and as a result, they chose local content. 20 years ago, perhaps a bellwether for the future. For myself, I think it's fascinating if we look at France. France regulates its media industry like crazy. 1 in 4 songs on radio has to be French. Streaming is unregulated, and French music has never been so prominent in the charts since streaming. So the unregulated markets have achieved what the regulated markets failed. What does that mean for policy? Rabbit hole number 3, Steve Boone from Amazon. Amazon's making more money from advertising than it is from AWS, so I suggest we listen to him. He now reports to Andy Jassy. And if I jump to the end of this quote that he gives us, he says, as we become more global, we are also becoming more tribal. That's crucial. That's absolutely crucial here. 4 of 6, Nigel Elton, a veteran music publisher, very blunt remark. 20 years ago, the German charts was a carbon copy of British and American culture. Not anymore. German festivals are full of German bands performing in German. And this is potentially because of the need for more national identity across Europe. There could be a Brexit angle to that, people. 5th, Hagar Grazer, who works for Platoon in Cape Town, South Africa, an Apple Music company. She thinks this trend that we've seen in music of localization of content has gone too far. If you think about data science and algorithms, they send you into echo chambers. So Martin's going to listen to a jazz playlist, and it's just going to be jazz. Ralph's going to listen to a blues playlist, it'll just be blues. And I'll listen to a rock playlist, it'll just be rock. We're not like that. We want to mix it up. A bit of jazz, a bit of blues, a bit of rock. The algorithms don't allow that. So her argument is to say, perhaps the pendulum swung too far, and we need to become much more of a global citizen again. Then lastly, Ralph, to your point, if music is the first to suffer and the first to recover, and we're seeing this trend of localized content, what happens when it reaches the world of marketing and advertising, and you guys feel the same headwinds? That's why I'm so excited to hand back to Ralph to work out, people, the world isn't flat after all. So where do we go next, Ralph?
Okay, give Will a big hand. Interesting work, and an important thing to note here is just how this is a changing fact in the world of advertising and what it is doing. So now it gives us great pleasure to introduce Sir Martin Sorrell, one of the great leaders in advertising and marketing, and of course in the last 5 years, since 2018, when Sir Martin started S4 Capital, now has 8,900 people working in the company in 32 countries. So Martin, welcome. Great to see you here. And one of the things we wanted to speak about was the way that you're focusing everything with S4 Capital and digital advertising and the way that you've grown it so substantially. Tell us about how clients are now moving down the funnel, prioritizing performance and activation, measurement of marketing ROI, and the media mix modeling.
Yeah, well, the previous panel I thought was quite interesting because they talked about attention and they talked about time spent. One thing they didn't talk about was sales. They talked about brand lift. And any CEO watching that presentation probably would say to himself or herself, where's the beef? Where are the sales? And that's the critical issue. So the reason why people are moving down the funnel to activation and performance and measurement, and that will be driven by AI. I mean, I don't think in the previous panels really they got into artificial intelligence to any great degree, or AGI to any degree. I mean, listening to the media planner or buyer from IPG, I was struck, in time, you're not going to be using I doubt whether he was 25, but a 25-year-old media planner or buyer, you're going to be using an algorithm. So, and when you think about what he was talking about and the various platforms, research sources, feedback loops, the human mind, it is probably impossible for the human mind to absorb all that data. It is possible for the human mind to analyze something that has brought all that data together. So that's where the human layer is above the AI or the AGI. But coming back to the thing that Will touched on, I think what you're seeing there is a symptom of what's happening. There are two, as far as I'm concerned, there are two things happening at the moment. The one is that the theory that the world was flat, which was actually fashioned in 1983 by Ted Levitt, who was a famous marketing professor at Harvard Business School. He over-egged the pudding to make the point. He said that consumers would consume everything in the same way everywhere. What's happening at the moment is that given all the problems that we have, and I don't have to go through the laundry list of them, but if you start with US-China, or lack of US-China relationships, you go on to the war in Ukraine, and how long that's going to last, and think about Iran, and we're seeing more problems erupt in the Middle East. If you take just those three, apart from climate change, Yemen and everything else that we have to deal with, North Korea and everything else, that is leading to a fragmentation and a fractionalization. And what you're seeing, what Will went through, to my mind, is a symptom of what's happening. So when I look at it from our point of view, operating in 32 countries, operating across all three major parts of the world that we operate in, the Americas, EMEA, and Asia Pacific, to my mind, what's happening is that consumers and clients are becoming more absorbed by their local or regional characteristics. So you're seeing a breakdown of people looking at things globally. So let me just run through where I see it happening globally. A lot in the work that Will's done and others done on glocalization is the rise of Spanish and Latin American culture, but that might be in the US with the Hispanic population, it may be in other parts of the world. So one thing to bear in mind, and it's easy sitting here in London or in New York thinking that London or New York is the center of the world, either creatively or technologically. That is not the case. If you look at that North America, South America power block, it is immensely powerful. It's a uniform time zone. And with the trends towards populism that we've seen, certainly to date, politically, make America great again, bringing back manufacturing to America. You won't bring back labor-intensive manufacturing to America. You'll bring back technologically intensive. You know, you'll have Brookfield working with Intel in Columbus, Ohio on chip factories, but the manufacturing goes to Mexico. Apple and Tesla go into Mexico, and you'll see more of that. So supply chain disruption that we saw through COVID will be remedied by having supply chains in that block in North and South America. So think about that as being one integrated, further integrated market. Despite leftward political shifts in Mexico or Brazil or Chile, we're already seeing reversals of that. Despite that, Obrador, Lula will be attracting investment into their countries and building that block. So think about that block. In the context of EMEA, let's put Europe to one side for a minute, I'll come back to it. The Middle East, because of the rise in oil prices and the continued likelihood of that rise in oil prices, if you see some of the commentary in the last 24, 48 hours about what may happen with energy prices next winter, natural gas with China coming out of lockdown, I'll come on to that in a second, you're going to see energy prices maintained. And so that whole power block in the Middle East, and we're doing a lot of work in Saudi and UAE and elsewhere, we're seeing huge growth on a limited scale, it's true globally, but huge growth relatively in that part of the world. So Middle East, Africa, probably too volatile for my taste and for many of our clients' taste, but certainly big opportunities in Nigeria, in Ethiopia, in South Africa, and other parts of Africa, but very volatile. And then moving to Asia, front and center, if you think about 2050 and where GDP will be, the number one economy probably will be China. Mm-hmm. Secondly will be the US. Thirdly will be India. Fourthly will be either Germany or Indonesia, and fifth will be Germany or Indonesia. Those will be the 5 biggest markets from a GDP point of view. And if you think about the Premier League as an analogy, Asia will have 1, 3, and 4 or 5. So Asia becomes the epicenter as well, and that America's block, that pillar, and the Asia-Pacific pillar. China is an issue for clients if they have big positions in China. You take one car client that I'm well aware of, has 70% of its production in joint ventures in China. Would they want more? I doubt it. Another one of our clients has 7% of its sales in China. Would they want more? I think they would. China's weighting should already be about 20% of sales, if you think about it, current GDP. Current GDP in China is about 18 trillion, the world is 100 trillion. So the world is very much like that, and I mentioned Europe. I don't want to depress you sitting here in London, but here I go. It ain't going to be pretty in Europe, in my view, over the next few years. France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the UK, for all sorts of reasons, are going to face challenges. And the world generally is going to be lower growth, higher inflation, despite what central banks want. Inflation will stubbornly resist going down to 2%, and higher interest rates as a result. And in that environment, growth and margin for clients are going to be absolutely critical. So they're going to be scrambling for growth in markets and picking off markets where they see, so following your glocalization, where they see opportunities. The second thing is technological change. Yeah. And if we think we've seen a lot of it with the internet and smartphones, stand by, because AI is a fundamental shift And let me just mention 5 things that we've already seen in our business. You know, we're a $1 billion business, so relatively small, 9,000 people, 32 countries, 57 offices, 50% tech. But we've seen 5 things already. The first thing is a stimulation and improvement in productivity, in visualization, and copywriting. That's number 1. Number 2, and this gets to Will's point, hyper-personalization at scale.
Yeah.
The irony is that although the world isn't flat, and although whether it's deglobalization, whatever you want to call it, although we're going to a much more local or regionally based model, our ability through technology to reach people in a highly individualized way will go up several notches. For Netflix, we might be able to produce 1.5 million different pieces of creative content for one campaign. With AI and AGI, we'll be able to produce multiples of that. So hyper-personalization is the second area. The third area is what I just touched on before, media planning and buying. The holding companies employ about 250,000 to 300,000 people on media planning and buying. That will go. That will be replaced largely, particularly in the digital marketplace, which is 2/3 of advertising already. It's already 650 out of 900 billion of global media. It will be 75% by 2025. That will be, that human interaction, that human network will be replaced significantly by algorithms. And the human input will be analysis of the analysis that is spat out by that mechanization. So that's the third area. The fourth area is using AI as a super tool within our own business to improve productivity. And finally, trying to make me shut up, but that finally, and this is the most important thing, it's one thing that gets ignored and sort of pushed to one side. It is the ability of the organizations to transmit knowledge to everyone inside the company. Inside all companies, they're run vertically. They're run around profit centers. And people tend to protect their profit centers, particularly people at the top of them. What AI will enable us to do, if we input the right data and we give open access to people inside our company, open access to all the information, it will enable us to transmit information magically around the company. And that is something that really has been lacking to date, because information is power, and people use their power to create verticals inside companies to the detriment of what we're trying to do. So take us, for example. Just one thing I think is really important. The guy who resigned from Google, who developed DeepMind, or was one of the developers of DeepMind at Google since 2014, said that the reason he resigned was he was really worried about the existential threat that bots, if you had 10,000 bots, every bot would know what the other 9,999 bots knew instantly. In a way, that's the big opportunity with AI. If I take our organization, 9,000 people, I'd like everyone to know what the other 8,999 knew. We will be able to do that with this technology. That, to my mind, is the magic that will bring. It will empower everybody inside the company to understand, if it's perfectly executed, to understand what is going on. That is a huge change. Organizations will be flattened. It will be democratized in a very significant way, and getting people to understand the organization's purpose, mission, vision, etc., will be that much easier. Anyway, sorry, I banged on too long.
Here's an interesting point. Will is focused on glocalization.
Yeah.
The truth is the advertising industry has always been glocalized. If you look, for example, campaigns in Europe, German campaigns will focus on German interests.
But Ralph, the technology, so for example, I can think of a client where we have centralized creative production. So development of creative and execution of it, 27, 29 national sales organizations.
Right.
Our ability, the old argument in the automotive business was the French consumer is different to the German, to the UK. you now have the technology that enables you to encompass that.
Right.
Yes.
You can produce creative that is so when Netflix launches a new series, the ad that you receive, and the ad that I receive can be totally different.
Yeah.
So our ability to target, even with the changes to third-party cookies by Google, even with the IDFA changes around it, and Apple's concern, quite rightly, around privacy, even with that, our ability to target has gone up several notches. Right. And stand by, because it's going to get, and this is where the difficult thing is. We don't know whether that development is positive for our industry in terms of employment or negative. Anybody who says they know the answer is fibbing. We just don't know.
If I can just give one very quick example on Netflix and those trading blocks you talked about and how these countries are trading. And if you look at the Spanish chart today, it's never been so much Spanish language content. It's entirely Spanish language content, but there's no Spanish bands. They're all Latin American. So Latin America is trading music to Spain, but then if you look at Netflix Content City in Madrid, which is bigger than anything Hollywood has to offer, Spain is exporting video content, eyeball content, to Latin America. So you have this interesting trading platform. That's my world of music and TV. For advertising,
let me
it's really
just
important.
expand that a little bit, because I'm a great fan of Latin America and of Asia. And what we don't understand in the West is the power balance is shifting significantly. So the mucky mucks inside our industry, who look back to the days of Mad Men and Don Draper through rose-tinted spectacles, they all think that the great talent is located in New York and London, maybe some other centers as well. If you look at the talent in Latin America in two areas, creatively and technologically, it is as good, if not better, than anything you see elsewhere in the world. And that is the rude awakening that we're going to be that's going to be developed.
The English-speaking world hasn't produced a money heist.
No, and that's in Netflix programming. That's correct. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about the streamers is our experience has been the big opportunities are in local programming. People tended to think it was the global hits. As you wrote in your article and the other articles that we were looking at before, it was the global. It's not the global hits. It's the local stuff that really. We launched the Univision, the joint venture between, well, not joint venture, the new company Univision and Ascariga in Mexico, and the learning from that when they launched was the power of Hispanic language programming. And in a way, Brazil's biggest issue is its Portuguese programming. And it has to be its Portuguese language programming. But it's the local stuff that really pays the bills.
And to underline that point, the entire Portuguese chart is in Portuguese, but it's entirely Brazilian artists. Well,
so we'd love to have some questions from yourselves in this open forum when we come to the conclusion of this in a few minutes. So think about something that you'd like to ask Sir Martin or Will about issues that we've spoken about today, but more particularly this whole notion of re-engaging people in a digital form, and what you've seen in the last 5 years. You've obviously laid out these 5 issues that are changing things. What do you think, what advice can you give to the people that are here in this particular session as to what they should be focusing on in terms of AI? No, in terms of AI.
Well, I think they should do 2 things. Learn Chinese and learn code, although you probably don't have to learn code anymore because you can use GitHub Bard or ChatGPT to write it for you. Maybe the coders tell me not very effectively as yet, but that's just a question of time.
That's a question of time.
So that would be my advice. And Spanish too, sorry.
Will, some more comments from you from an economic standpoint, what you've been observing in terms of popular taste, how it grows, what drives the trigger to get something popular?
Well, it's interesting, again, if you go back to that point of this country, which is a proud music industry, hasn't produced a hit since Dua Lipa in 2017. What we're seeing happen in Germany, for example, is the German festivals this summer are selling out completely with German language bands. And then the English and the American bands come over and say, I want $1 million to headline your festival, and the promoters are saying, well, I've sold out all my tickets, how much are you going to pay me to get on the bill? I think that's an example of a power shift in music that you might see sort of percolate into the world of advertising and marketing, where the English language world doesn't hold the sway that it used to. That's the cold shower that we're about to take.
Right, but the reason in part for that is the technology has enabled us to connect. You know, there was an article I was just reading before coming on stage. So Mukesh Ambani is going to provide mobile phones at very low cost and connection at very low cost to Indian consumers. I mean, at ridiculously low prices. You remember he went in to connections at zero. He gave it away for free to establish his market share. Now he's going to be providing hardware and connections to everybody in India because the digital divide is a great worry. So if you think about that for a minute, and you think about all the Hindi dialects that there are, there are 50 odd of them, I think there are more than 50 of them, you'll be able to transmit to people through that hardware and software very effectively.
Let me slide on that point maybe as a closer as well. Super crucial what Sir Martin just told you there. The biggest Indian acts today are recording in a minimum of 6 different languages. Maybe there's a lesson we can learn from that.
Well, we can, and in fact, for the first time ever in history at the Oscars this year, the Oscar going to the best song went to a song that was recorded in a language called Telugu from Hyderabad, a song called Natu Natu, that was a massive, massive hit and started to spread all over the world. So this is part of the seepage that we're seeing. So is there anybody who has got a question that they'd like to pose to these two individuals here? Anybody, raise your hand if you've got a question that you'd like to raise. We've got a short...
Good, here, yes. Over there.
Tell us, what's your name, where you're from? That lady over there, give her the mic. Okay. What's your name and where are you from?
Dagmara, founder of Flow City. I'm originally from Poland. I am working on an algorithm, not there yet, but on that, it was very interesting what you said about an algorithm supporting media planning. To what extent do you think that current algorithms are still based on the human media planning approach, and to which extent will the human factor still play a part in media planning?
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know, but I think what's going to happen, I mean, the algorithm is only effective, it depends on the data that's inputted. So garbage in, garbage out. So on the assumption, just take the New Balance example for a minute. If you fed in all the data that the planner from Media Hub was talking about, or I know it's a planner or buyer or strategist or whatever, but all the sources, you fed those in, and you got the answers, in terms of lift, in terms of sales even, maybe we had some sales statistics in there as well, you'd be able to analyze it far more effectively than the human brain. The human brain then can take those results and interpret them in different ways, which the machine at one level may not be able to do, at least in the first few years. Maybe later on, going back to the guy who resigned from Google, he's worried about machines actually being able to do it even more effectively than humans. That's the existential threat. But I think certainly in the early stages, we'll start to see people, as you develop your algorithm, feed in more and more data, get more and more accurate results and responsive results, and start to deploy it, and human beings use those results to deploy campaigns and development. So I think there is a balance. It's not replacement. Longer term, we have to see what happens, because I think the development is very, very significant. We're seeing it. Well, literally, you could argue this has been in development since 2014. But let's assume for a minute we only got excited about it really in the last 6 months or so. In 6 months, we've seen huge advances. And my view will be that it'll take another 6 months. We'll see far more. If you look at the VC capital that's piling in particularly in the US and particularly in China, and there is a war between China and the US. If you see the 26-year-old guy, I think his name was Alex Wong, who left MIT and started Scale AI. It's very Chinese, very anti-Chinese establishment, very concerned about America's leadership position in AI. You're going to see a struggle between the Chinese and the Americans for dominance. And I think the development is going to be, so within 2 years, when we come back to MadFest in 2 years, I think the playing field in media planning and buying will look totally different.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Will Page, the editor of Pivot and a great economist. Let's hear it for Sir Martin Sorrell. Always brings great thinking into the question. My name is Ralph Simon. Thanks for coming and thanks for being with us. And we hope you have a good, successful time here at MadFest. So.